Hey guys, it's me, Maya. Welcome back to the Better Not Bitter podcast, and I am your host. Today we have another special guest, but before we get into it, we're going to drop that intro. All right, guys. So today I have with me Reagan Sink. He is a man of many talents, and he is here to share his experiences and just some things that we should know regarding disability. And without further ado, Reagan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Maya. It's awesome to be here.
No problem. For those that don't have the pleasure of knowing you, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm Reagan. I'm 24 years old. I am disabled due to a disability called spinal muscular atrophy. It's a muscle weakness disease similar to ALS in the effects. Of course, the genetics part is much different, but I am very disabled, but I still try to make the best out of every situation that I'm ever dealt.
That's awesome, and thank you for sharing that. Could you talk about some of the ways that your particular disability affects you, like starting from when you were younger compared to now?
I was diagnosed with SMA, which is the acronym for spinal muscular atrophy, at about 13 months of age. And I think at the time for my parents and for my family in general, it was a very scary time. Your child is diagnosed with this disease that at the time had a mortality rate of about 95%. 5% of kids were not making it past 2 years of age, and you're dealt this hand, and it's very scary for them, I'm sure. As far as it affects me, um with the disease, the natural course of it is it makes you weaker over time. It's a progressive disease. So of course, as I was younger, I was able to do more things physically with my arms and stuff like that. I've never been able to walk. I've always been either in a stroller or in a wheelchair as I've gotten 5 years and older. And there's a lot of things I can't do, a lot of things that I think people sort of miss out on, a lot of minor things that really affect my day-to-day life. And it gets hard. It's difficult. I mean, things from like feeding to handing me my phone to handing me equipment that I need. I mean, just I think stuff that physically able-bodied people typically don't think about. And it's a challenge, like I said, but I've been blessed with wonderful parents that have helped me and taken care of me and have loved me unconditionally. They were older when I came. My dad was 46, my mom was 37. So they were a little bit older, a little bit more mature. And I've also had great family, great aunts and uncles, cousins, and awesome friends along the way too. It's a challenge, and you know, I see it as an opportunity to spread my message and to say, hey, things might be difficult, things might be different. I may not have the normal life that everybody else has, but I still get by. I still try to be myself. I still try to enjoy life, and I try to do things to be successful. I'm sorry, Maya. There was no audio coming from you.
Oh, well, I was
There we
saying
go.
self-advocacy, it sounds like what you shared, being younger compared to now, is that you've grown in the level of self-advocacy. And for people who have a disability or not, it's extremely important to develop that skill. but even more so if you do have a disability. Could you talk about some of the ways that self-advocacy has played a role in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I was younger, I didn't put too much emphasis on, the fact that I was disabled or the fact that other people have disabilities.
Sorry about that.
And you're fine. But yeah, when I was younger, I didn't put too much emphasis on the disability. I knew I was disabled. I knew what I could and couldn't do. I knew all the facts about SMA and how it affected me. But I think as I've gotten older, I've really learned to view the world as a whole more and view other disabilities and realize that I think you've talked on your podcast before, there's a lot of invisible disabilities that people don't see on a day-to-day
Hmm.
basis. And I think I've become more aware of that as I've gotten older. And I think advocacy, as I've gotten older as well, has really played a part. When I was younger, I didn't really, like I said, I didn't pay much attention to other disabilities. I was just a kid and I was doing teenage things and, just living my life trying to have fun. I think as I've gotten older, it's come more in perspective. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that advocacy is very important. There's a lot of disabled people out there. A lot of people I don't even realize they're disabled because they have those invisible disabilities. And if they don't talk about it, you don't know. So I try to treat people with a certain level of respect and a certain level of understanding. So yeah, I try to. I'm not
Hmm.
someone that goes out and goes to these walkathons or rollathons in my case. But it's something
Yeah.
that does matter to me, especially the SMA community as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's um, well said. Well said. Especially your point about even though you're not able to, or you may not have the time to go to a walkathon. I don't either. A lot of times these walkathons aren't even close to where I live, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, but just caring and doing what you can in your daily life and your relationships to kind of, show that you care through self advocating and maybe advocating for others. I think that brings up a really good point, because I run into, as an advocate, a lot of people who either have an invisible disability or like a visible disability. And, a lot of them, not all, but some feel like, man, I wish I could do more in the way of like advocating or communicating regarding their disability. And something that I tell them, like, what are you good at? And people are like, oh, what do you mean by what am I good at? I'm trying to advocate. And I'm like, what are you good at? Because what you are good at is going to basically become the modicum through which you advocate. So for me, as an advocate, one of the ways that I advocate and involve my skills is I love creating online content. So when I was presented with the opportunity to do that, it became like, okay, well, I'm already doing this just for the fun of it. Now it has a purpose. And so I'd like for you to kind of talk about some of the ways, whether it be in your relationships with your family or friends, or just maybe online, maybe through writing, hint, hint, some of the ways that you utilize some of the things that you're talented at or gifted at or good at to advocate.
Yeah. I think for me, I spent a lot of years sort of wondering what I could do. And I think I sort of got into a loop where it was like, there's nothing I can do. I don't know how to do this stuff. I'm not talented. And it sort of gets mixed in with the whole, like, being in my teenage years, dealing with some things like depression, because, I'm dealt this hand, this life, it's hard to keep positive always. But as of recently, I've told you that I'm looking into starting, doing some creator content as well, either through video game
Woo-woo.
streaming or making a podcast or something like that, and talking about disability, specifically, SMA. And I'm a ways away from starting any of that, but I'm getting stuff together and I want to do it right and I want to figure out exactly what I want to do. But also, as you mentioned, the hint, I do have a blog that I keep updated periodically. I'm not someone that can sit down and write on a whim. I have to be inspired. But I do have a blog
Mm-hmm.
that sort of details some of my history with dealing with the SMA and starting a couple treatments that they've come out with, going through college, and also delving into sort of the mental aspect and the mental struggles that I've dealt with. And I enjoy writing. I think that it's something I'm decent at, and that's something I can also use as a platform. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of ignorance, and not by fault, but a lot of ignorance when it comes to disabilities and how it affects people. And I think
Yeah.
something that I can really do is sort of get my message out there and sort of try to educate people on it and help them to understand that, hey, it's not as always easy as it seems, or it's not as simple as it seems.
Oh yeah. You touched on several things. I'm trying to figure out which direction to go in. Um, and I just had an episode on Monday, I believe, with a friend of mine, Cassidy Hooper, and she's totally blind. Um, and I asked her, I was like, because something that I get as someone who is visually impaired, and she's part of the vision impairment community, we people underestimate not only the abilities of people with disabilities, but they underestimate like the psychological and the mental aspect that it plays. And it's not as simple as taking this pill or using this device, and everything is like a bandage and you'll be fine. Um, so what you said reminded me of that, like at least for me, the mental aspect of chronic illness, which is also debilitating, and then having a disability, that is something that more and more I'm getting to a place where I'm learning to work through it and accept that there's lows. There's a lot of lows. um, and I think for a while I was frustrated when I began the process of working through those lows because I don't know anybody with a disability within my vicinity or online that I've truly seen be transparent about the lows of
Right.
disability or chronic illness. And um, it kind of does a disservice because it's, you ever see the news and they have someone with a disability doing something so great,
Yeah.
per
Absolutely. I have.
se? Yeah.
It's
And,
like that. That's the model image, and
yes,
reality is often very different.
yes. And, while I'm like, yay, that's awesome. But at the same time, people see that and they're like, that's their one time a year that they feel a tug at their heart, but it's so much more than that. Like, and
It's it's really difficult in my
yeah,
experience to balance sort of, and a lot of it too is talking about transparency. It's hard for me at least to be transparent about everything because there are a long list of insecurities that I have that it's not something I want to go out and be public about, but I think sort of embracing who you are and saying that, hey, I have these insecurities, but that doesn't make me any less of a person. It doesn't make me at any kind of disadvantage. It's like, you got to embrace it. You got to say, hey, this is my life, and I'm gonna take it in stride and go forward.
yeah,
It's
that's
tough
a
though.
good
It's
point.
tough to learn. It's tough to do. It's not as easy as getting up and saying, hey, this is, I'm Reagan Sink. Here is everything that's ever bothered me,
Yeah.
and putting that public, because it's especially when it comes to the mental aspect of it. Depression has such a stigma around it
Hmm.
still, and I think it's getting better slowly, but people that are depressed don't exactly want to go and broadcast how they feel emotionally, because
No, and
people see that and they attack it, they latch onto it, and it's like, well, you shouldn't be depressed, just don't be depressed, just smile. It's not that simple.
yeah, and That is a great point. And to that point, like I've had moments where I have been depressed, especially so with chronic illness, depending on which type you have, and everybody's different. Mine has progressed and not in a good way. So like it makes it even more difficult because there are days where you're like, oh wow, I'm getting like today's an okay day, and then boom, this
Hmm.
uptick in pain and
Yeah,
symptoms that most people don't even have that probably have my condition. And it's like,
I
dang,
know.
yeah, it's like I
I know
thought I
exactly how that feels. I'm
right.
going
It's
through
like
that right now, actually. So it's a challenge, but I hope what I'm going through right now is temporary. It's nothing major, just some weakness. But with the nature of my disease, is you get weaker over time, you
mhm,
atrophy, and it's tough. You don't know if you're going to wake up tomorrow and be significantly weaker than you were yesterday.
mhm.
It's scary, but at the same time, it's like I know what to do. I've got knowledge on the disease. I've got knowledge on my needs and my necessities. So it helps make it a little bit easier, but it still doesn't take it away, you know?
Yeah, I hear you. Um, and you know, and I'm sure you are probably aware of this, is that just as no two people with the same disability have the same experience, no two people in this world have the same experience.
Exactly.
But and I think sometimes people, I think the media unfortunately has done a disservice to the disability community and how we're
Yeah.
represented because there's so much diversity in our experiences and with within the community itself. Like it's
I I
amazing.
I
Hmm?
absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I think that it's something that has been on my mind a lot lately, and something that's really bugged me is
Hmm.
that in the United States, at least, the media and even the politicians, there is very little emphasis on disabled people. It's almost, in my feeling, we are an afterthought, and it hurts. It's like, I am for equality in every sense of the word, but I don't feel like we are getting the same treatment as just people with disabilities as a lot of others. And it's like, help us out, pay attention, like understand us. Don't be ignorant to what we go through.
Yeah. You mentioned something really important because I feel the same way. Like every year since well, before I was able to vote, I was kind of the kid that would like kind of sit in on some of the debates. And if you watch on certain news outlets, there's like a panel on the side that highlights the issues they're going to be asked about.
Mhm.
And every, 4 years, I'm sitting there waiting to see something related to disability rights or anything like that because contrary to popular belief, the largest minority in this country is made up of people with disabilities, and the largest minority in the entirety of this world are people with a disability. And
But I think it comes back to what you said is there's a lot of invisible disabilities and people just don't notice it. I
yeah,
don't think that I don't think people, in regards to the media and to the politicians, are sort of brushing over disabled people to be mean. I think
hmm,
it's that it's misunderstood to an exponential degree.
oh yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think a large portion of why I do what I do is because I want to bring visibility to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole premise of this podcast, while I have done episodes by myself, but the reason I bring on dope people like you and others is because I want to put a face to these disabilities. I want people to hear the voice of the person in the supermarket who is um, using a cane for mobility purposes or for navigating the world around it. I want people to get that every person in a power chair or a wheelchair, is an individual and not someone who's just taking a ride through the supermarket. So like
Exactly.
putting visibility and stories to these things is extremely important.
Yeah, I can't tell you, and I think this is something that's frustrating for me is I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been out in public, in a supermarket, out just, at a restaurant doing whatever, and someone will approach me, and, I'm usually with my mom or my dad,
Hmm.
and they won't direct their questions at me. They will direct
Right.
them at my parents. And it's like, I usually just sit there and snicker because it's like, well, I am perfectly able of answering any questions about my disability. Probably, no offense to my mom and dad, but probably better than them. Uh, so, I think people, and I get it. I get it that it's hard to discern, who has the ability and who doesn't. But
Hmm.
I think one of the biggest problems that I've faced is there are so many people that would rather assume than ask.
Preach. And I was actually going to get to the point of asking you about that because with every disability, there are different sets of things that are either stereotypical or
Mhm.
just things that are no, no, like please respect my equipment or this, that, and the third. Um, and it all leads back to people assuming. Uh, and something that I talk about every podcast probably is the idea of relational proximity, meaning that before we assume, or even after you assume, if you're approaching somebody, like the best way to engage with someone who has a disability is relational proximity, building a relationship,
Mhm.
um, learning to view that person as an individual, and don't expect them to tell you the XYZ of their story. Don't expect
Sure.
them to give you the ins and outs because they don't owe you that. But
Right.
relationship opens the doors for that to happen, but you have to be willing to, okay, put down those misconceptions you have and be teachable. Something
Yeah.
I always say is like people with disabilities and chronic illnesses, we are students of our own disabilities and conditions.
Hmm.
How much more do the people around us need to be students of the people who have disabilities and chronic illnesses if we want
Absolutely.
things to work better as a society?
I think there has to be a focus on teaching people. And a lot of it, like I said before, a lot of it is not that people are unwilling to learn, it's that they're not, it's not pushed onto them. It's not by the media. No one puts a focus on disabilities. And if you don't get that focus, you don't learn about it. There's plenty of things that I don't know about because it's never been brought to my attention.
Mhm.
And it's partially my fault, and it's partially the fault of things like, again, the media and just the state that the United States is in. And I'm, maybe the rest of the world as well. It's very frustrating, but I have hope, and I guess this is the optimist in me, that within, hopefully 10, 20 years, there's going to be a big push for people that have disabilities because, you've got podcasts like you. I know several people that disabled people with my disease that have YouTube channel that are content creators, and they're getting their message out there. They're teaching their stories. They're saying that, hey, we're different, but we're not we still have lives. We still are, we're still people. And I think
Yeah,
that's kind of the thing that gets me is like some people act like people with disabilities are not as much of a person as them. And
yeah,
no, I'm just as much as anybody else.
yeah, that is so true. And to your point, I believe the reason why all these things are an issue is because people are uncomfortable, genuinely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, I cannot tell you the amount of times people have not want to walk on the same aisle or even touch me because they could tell I had no pigment, but they didn't know what was going on.
Right.
People are genuinely uncomfortable. They don't know how to act when they see something that isn't normal. And
And
so,
I
mhm,
feel like it's worse maybe for me and you, since we live pretty close in proximity.
mhm,
There's not a ton of diversity
mhm,
in our area. It's pretty, it's pretty much the same kind of people everywhere you go. It's not
mhm,
like this very wide, but you're not seeing people that have lack of pigment very often. You're not seeing people in power wheelchairs very often. And when you don't get exposed to that very often, you're not going to put much of an emphasis on it. And that's not anyone's fault. It's just the fact that the
mm-mm,
people around our area is the majority of one kind. Um,
Well, and through my research and getting to know people, there are so many people with disabilities, at least in my area, but you have a lot of people who have different socioeconomic
mhm.
statuses that also prevent them from even having upward mobility or outward mobility. And then you have to think about the fact that um, we still have a lot to work to do in terms of, like, not everybody is fortunate to have good support systems. So a lot of
Yeah.
people are still sequestered within the confines of where they live, um, and there's still this kind of hide them away mentality. And I think one of the ways that we can address that is, whether it's a rural or urban community, like teaching people who don't have disabilities just the heart posture. So for me as an advocate, I can't possibly know everything about every chronic illness, medical
Mhm.
condition, or disability. It's impossible. I am not God. I am not a computer. But what I can do is position myself to, again, it goes back to being teachable, and also going back to the basics of treating people with dignity and respect. And in this world, that might seem like, oh, you're preaching, but genuinely, like, if you honor the humanity that someone has, like, if I didn't know you, I would at least have the guts, bare minimum, to respect you as an individual, knowing that you have your own mouth, you have your own five senses, you can communicate however best you communicate, regardless of the severity of your disability. Like, if we get back to that, but I think what happens is people see someone with a disability or someone that's different, and that all, like, gets jumbled up in their brain, and it's like, oh, well, this is different, so that let's throw that away.
I think, back to what you said, you have to be teachable and you also have to have empathy. And
Mm.
I feel like a lot of people um I sort of lack true empathy. They say they love people, they say they're accepting, but having true empathy, it's I think sort of rare to find.
Yeah, and I think the reason why it's rare is because I talk about this. Okay, so you know, I know people who are more willing to lay hands on you, to pray for you, like, in the moment, but then if you need somebody, they're nowhere to be found. They don't want to know
Yeah.
the ins and out of your situation. And to me, that bothers me, because in that scenario, prayer is an excuse to do the bare minimum and then go about your way, and you got another notch in your belt for somebody that you prayed for. That's not cool. And so I think, you know, not just in a Christianity context, but in, like, a world context, people, we've gotten lazy. I don't know if it's because of social media or media in general, or the way we're structured as a society now, but people, we've gotten lazy. Like, to actually get to know people and have empathy, that
Yeah.
requires work.
It's
Like,
tough. It's not as simple as flipping a switch and having empathy.
mhm.
You really have to work for it, and you really have to have a good heart. And one story that I would like to bring up, and I sort of debated on if I wanted to mention it or not, is
Well,
when I
pause,
was
pause. You don't gotta censor yourself. Be as honest
oh,
as you need to be.
awesome. Well, when I was young, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old.
Mhm,
There's a retirement center near my home that we go and my parents walk out, and I'll stroll along with them. Still do it to
mhm,
this day. And as we were out one night walking, we ran into a couple that my mom knew. And
mhm,
this lady was not, didn't live too far, it's a few streets away from us. And
mhm.
she was a very, very religious person. And, I'm not here to talk bad about religion. I grew
I
up in
hear
a
you.
religious family. My family's very, I'm religious. But she brought up the fact that I was disabled because of the sins that my parents have committed. And at the time I don't understand, I'm 5 years old, you don't understand that. But the irony of the situation, here's the kicker. This lady also had a disabled son. So I don't really understand what spurred her to say that. And you know, I don't let things bother me too much. I'm a very hard person to offend, actually. But looking back, I just don't see how anyone has the gall to say something like that to a family with a young disabled child. Or it wouldn't matter if it was me or you or anybody else. How could you have the lack of care and the meanness and the vileness in your heart to say that? That's not I don't know about you, but that's not what God preaches.
That you are on point. And first of all, I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing that. And for me, my heart breaks, not out of offense, but it breaks because as a Christian, um, that even being called a Christian is difficult because of people who do those types of
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
And in a lot of cases, for those who don't know God, that might be the only representation of God that they get. And now, like, forget God. I don't want nothing to do
yeah,
with y'all or your God. And so, for me, I get frustrated at ideas, not necessarily people. And the
yeah,
idea that people would misconstrue theology and then use it to in what seems to vindicate her own hurt and frustration with having a son that has a disability. And so I'm sorry that happened. I know it probably still doesn't bother you, but I'm sorry that happened. And to anybody else who has experienced that, because I know a lot of people who have had church hurt as someone with the chronic illness or a disability, and it's not really addressed enough. But yeah, those types of things are really really damaging. I'll
I
tell you.
find it. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, you can go ahead.
I find it hurtful,
Yeah.
or at least annoying, when someone of strict faith will come up to me and says, you know, "You're in this wheelchair because God has a plan. You know, you are disabled because God has a plan for you." It's like that. I think, and that's happened on multiple occasions. That is actually a pretty common occurrence for me. It hurts. And, you
Yeah.
know, I don't let it bother me that much. I understand that even though they're saying something that is not to me nice, they mean it from a good place. So I guess you say the thought that counts, but it's
Mm,
still a very ignorant thing to say. It's a very, um, it's just not a good thing to say. And, you know, I advise people that if you're not disabled, don't say that. Don't say that to disabled people,
yeah.
please.
I'm gonna make 2 points on what you said because I feel the fire in my bones. One, I talked about this on my last podcast, as someone in the comment section just mentioned. And the reason why it keeps coming up is because obviously it's that important. And, you know, the fact that we even feel strange for bringing it up multiple times just tells you how rare it is.
Mhm.
So the the notion of this person sinned or their parents sinned, and therefore that is why they are sick or disabled, that is Old Testament case by case scenario. That didn't even apply to literally everybody.
Right.
Um, Second of all, in the New Testament, Jesus did not heal everybody. He was in multitudes of people. And my issue is that in American Christianity, we think that someone who is not healed on their timeline or who does not look like our definition of normal has either sinned, they're not praying hard enough, they're not believing hard enough, they lack faith, and that is damaging. It's hurtful and it's genuinely damaging because that is not the heart of God. That is not
No.
the heart of Jesus. That is far from it. That is you placing your uncomfortability and intertwining it with scripture to find reasoning to justify that uncomfortability. So now you become comfortable and you've just hurt somebody.
Mhm.
So I think we have to get to a place where we learn to lean into those uncomfortable moments and say, okay, I genuinely don't know what to say, but I see you're in a power chair. Can you tell me more about your story? I think,
Oh,
at least for me, if someone were to say, you know what, I don't know what to say about your migraines or your hypermobility disorder, but I would love for you to tell me more because I don't know.
Right.
That goes farther with me than you assuming and using bad doctrine to justify my situation.
Sure. It goes back to, like I said, ask, don't assume. If you're unsure about something, I think, and I only speak for myself here, but I think
Mhm.
most people with disability would appreciate that you're showing interest in learning rather than just assuming and coming off as someone that's mean. It,
Yeah.
it brings up another example of sort of a bizarre story.
Mhm.
A few years ago, it's probably been 5 or 6 years. I matched with a girl on a dating app, and
Mhm.
we were talking, and I was explaining to her that I was disabled and that my disability is because of muscle weakness, and I didn't get too into the genetics, but her reply was, "Why don't you just eat more protein and become strong?" And it didn't hurt my feelings. I just had to laugh. I just had to laugh and just I won't repeat what I thought, but I was like, man, that's just
That
that's
was
pretty
really cringy, like so
bad.
ignorant it was cringy.
Yeah. So it's a running joke
Wow.
amongst me and my group of best friends now. He's just like, yeah, man, I'm tired today. I just gotta go get a protein shake. So
I definitely hear you. I've had several examples like that. Not, obviously I don't have the same disability, but with my
right.
chronic illnesses and my vision
Sure.
impairment, I've had people, and I'm working on a project where I talk about a lot of these things, and people will text me like remedies for migraines, and it's not like, hey, rub this essential oil on your nose and that might help stuff. It's like put cream of tartar under your tongue,
Hmm.
stand upside down, these things. And then, like, what bothers me is you don't take the time to know the entirety of my story. Not
Right.
that I would tell you everything, 'cause you don't need to know everything, but
Hmm.
you don't know all the treatments I've tried. You
Hmm.
don't know what I'm doing now. And everybody with um who has chronic migraine disease is completely different in how they respond to any and everything. And so
Yeah.
I get
I think
the
there's sor-
amusement.
I think there's sort of a stigma amongst
Mhm.
disabilities is that one size fits all per disability.
Yeah.
And it's not that way. I have SMA, but the way it affects me is vastly different than someone else that has SMA. And on top of that, there's multiple types of SMA. If I compare me and my diagnosis to someone that has SMA type 1, which is what I am very, very different from the majority of them. It's not
Mhm.
a one size fits all type thing. So, you're saying, oh, well, this has been proven to help migraines. This has been proven to help muscle strength. It's like that, I mean, thanks for the effort, I guess, but it doesn't, it's not that simple. I mean, it's like I've had people try to give me remedies and stuff. It's like, have you thought that? I mean, do you think that I've never thought of doing that before? Like, I live this day in and day out. It's not like I'm like, oh wow, that's a great new idea. It's like, no, I've tried it. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And to that point, in the communities that I'm a part of related to my chronic illnesses, one of the things I see most common, and I experience this too, like when people, say, have you tried this? Have you done this? For some people that can come off as, hey, you're not doing enough, so let me find something
Yeah,
I don't think you found. And that can, like, especially because disabilities again come with a mental and a psychological component to it, so you can catch somebody on a bad day with that and end up doing a little more damage than you thought you were doing. You thought you were being helpful,
absolutely.
but it really was hurtful. And something my friend says, he's like, intent, like what you say, or intent doesn't negate the effect of what you said. So I can mean well when I say XYZ, but if it hurts you, it hurts you. And I have to own up to that.
Yeah, it does, and it just I don't know. It in my experience, it almost feels like insult to uh, my effort, as you said, my intelligence. It's like, why don't you try this? It's like, I've done hours and hours and hours and hours of research. I've tried many things. It's it's not Yeah, I don't think that someone on the internet that I barely know is going to be able to teach me something about myself.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think for the first part of my life, dealing with being visually impaired, as Che is in the comment section, um, and having albinism. And for those who don't know, that means I have lack of pigmentation in my eyes, hair, and skin. I am a Black woman at the age of 23, but I have blonde hair, hazel eyes because I lack pigmentation. Um, and a lot of my frustration was so pent up, I became bitter. Like,
Mhm.
um, when I did correct people, it was out of like anger and like, like it
Yeah,
was like, why can't you understand? And as I have grown and I became an advocate, I learned to kind of have compassion for people who are ignorant, because ignorance just means you don't know. Where I
yeah,
draw the line is disrespect. That is always where I
yeah.
draw the line.
There's a difference between ignorance and disrespect, and I feel like a lot of people
Mhm.
think, if I call, I've called people ignorant before. I said, that's an
Mhm.
ignorant approach to something. I'm not calling, a lot of people I think you're calling them stupid. That's not what I'm saying. It's saying that you've
Yeah.
not made an effort to try to understand. And
Mhm.
it's been, there's been some times where I've lashed out in anger, but I really try, especially as I've gotten older, to
Mhm.
understand that if you're not exposed to disabilities, if you're not seeing it on the daily, you don't understand. There's plenty of things
Yeah.
I don't see on the daily that I don't understand, but I'm not going to, go up to someone that has a disability that I've not seen or that I'm not familiar with and start insulting them by giving them remedies that I'm sure they've tried, or just assuming how they live their daily life.
Yeah. And to piggyback off of what you said, that's true. I talked about it with uh the host of another podcast that I'm a co-host with called the Life with Albinism Podcast. Shout out to Dale Hamilton. Um, and we were talking about albinism, and we were basically saying like you have to get to the point where you recognize it's not that common for a lot. Like even though albinism is prevalent, it's rare. Even though
Mhm.
disability is prevalent, not many people are exposed to someone with
Yeah.
a disability, be it visible or invisible.
Yeah.
And so taking that position helps a lot. I know a lot of people who are, you know, bitter, and for valid reasons. They have undergone some traumatic things as a result of people who are ignorant and people who are just full of malice. Um, but I think it helps, at least for me, um, not being afraid to have people ask me questions,
Yeah.
um, because I rather you ask me than Google, because
Yeah,
Google, there's
absolutely.
a lot of stuff wrong about disabilities, and I'm sure you know.
Absolutely. And that's what I've told my friends, if I meet someone new and we've this is the first time we've talked face to face, but again,
Mhm,
if you ever have questions, just ask me.
mhm.
Don't worry about search engines. Just if it involves me and my experience with it. Now, I can't answer every genetic question about SMA. That may be a good thing to look on Google or a medical website or get info from a doctor. But when it comes to life with a disability, again, not every size fits every person, and it, just ask. Don't assume something. Don't assume
Yeah,
I can or can't do something. And
right.
I really think that businesses and stuff like public travel have really
Mhm,
made an improvement on that. It's still not there. It's still not perfect.
mhm.
But I think that certain businesses and public transport and stuff like that has made improvement in recent years. So it's good
I
to
hear
see. I
you.
think we're heading in the right direction. It's going
Yeah,
to take time, especially when back to what we said earlier. The media is not focusing on it. The politicians aren't focusing on it. It's up to people like me and you to get our message out there and to sort of teach people about it.
yeah, yeah, I hear you, and I totally agree. Something I was thinking about as you were speaking just now is that, with disabilities or having a disability or chronic illness, um, it comes with a lot. But what helps managing that is people who are willing to be supportive. and understanding, as we've said, but also just taking the time to recognize that someone else's projection of your abilities is not the truth. And I had to learn that as well. I had a one of my friends, he's like a brother to me. His name is TJ Wall, and I had him on the podcast, I want to say last month. He has a form of SMA. I forget if it's one or two. And he lives out in Texas. And we were talking, and he said a similar thing. He was like, I just wish people wouldn't assume that just because I'm in this chair that I don't go out and enjoy life. And I mean, he
Yeah.
goes to football games. He's a huge football fan. And you know, Texas is really big on football. And
Right.
he you see him on Instagram like meeting politicians and whatnot. And he was like, I just wish people wouldn't assume that I don't live a life. You know, it's
Yeah.
difficult and there's highs and lows, but I'm living. Like, just disability doesn't mean I can't live. And
Well, I think it also, I think I don't remember, and I'm going to paraphrase this,
mhm,
but it's not so much disabled as different abled. You know,
there you go.
I am able to do a lot of the things that you and everybody else can do. I have to have
Mhm.
help doing it, but I go out, I go to football games, I go out to eat, I go to movies, I travel, I go, places. It's not just me sitting in my bedroom all day staring at a computer screen. And I think
Right.
that's sort of the expectations of people with my disease is that we are disabled and can't go out. Now, that actually brings me to another point is that
Mhm.
I find it sickening when, and I've seen this firsthand, that parents with children with disabilities can be ashamed. And I think
Yes.
they don't want to take them out. It's too much effort to expose them to the world. That that's sickening. And I think that I just wish that parents would have the love and the care for their children to really understand. Number one, understand what they're going through. Number two, let them live their lives.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, and I see it like on a regular basis, especially with what I do and the things that I've been able to do. My first job um was working at this place called Alliance of Disability Advocates, and every year they put on this conference for youth who have a wide range of disabilities. You name it, someone with the disability was probably there.
Hmm.
And it's called the Youth, I think, Leadership Conference or whatever. And, I got to volunteer and just, hang out with everybody, kind of be that person they could refer to. And one thing I noticed is you could tell the difference from the youth whose parents and family allowed them to be exposed to like human interaction and going out and about versus the youth who like being in Raleigh was like being at Disneyland. Like they, and to me, my heart broke, especially hearing a lot of their experiences, you know, and you could tell when they would share things like they blocked out the sessions. In one session they were talking about self-advocacy. Um and they had to define it for a lot of the members there, and I was just like, wow. And something that why I'm so like self-advocacy, self-advocacy, self-advocacy is because so many people, I'm not saying all, but so many people um have not been allowed to have enough level of independence where they
Hmm.
can advocate for themselves or even speak for themselves without someone else intervening. And they may mean well, but like by the time, if you want to pursue college or a job or creating a business or interactions with other individuals, like that is so important. And you rob people of that skill if you don't allow them to explore, to try, to fail. But
Hmm.
you rob people when you do that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's. I'm sure that there's a wide range of parents. Some that,
Mhm.
unfortunately, you hear stories about kids with disabilities, like one of the parents will leave, or I've heard of
Mhm.
stories where they put them up for adoption. And then, I'm so fortunate that I've been blessed with a great family, and my mom and my dad, and, aunts, uncles, cousins, like I said. But my mom and dad
Mhm.
have always, for the most part, been very supportive of my endeavors and have really been my cheerleader. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes they think that I'm not grateful because when you're dealing with a physical disability like mine, and there's not a lot that I can do for myself, there's a lot of things I have to ask for help for. So, I will
Mhm.
tell them, hey, get me a drink, or hey, hand me my phone, or do this, do that. And it it's really hard to manage because you don't want to say thank you after after everything they do,
Yeah.
because then it just gets old. But it's like if you're not saying thank you, then they think you're unappreciative. But anyway, that's a little off topic, but my parents have really
Oh,
been
it's
in
on
my back
topic.
corner. My my parents have been in my back corner, and my family as well, with my endeavors. I'm sort of going through a period in my life now where I want more independence. It's hard,
Yeah.
I'll never have complete independence. That's impossible. But a level of independence where I can determine what happens, or where I can define what that level of independence is, I think is something really important for me going forward. And I think my mom and dad understand it. And as time goes on, we'll see how it turns out. But just like,
Yeah.
I went to college online for a few years. They were,
Mhm.
behind me on that. Starting to streaming, hopefully eventually starting content creation. They've been behind that. And, I've been grateful. And I heard for the children that are born with these disabilities that they've not had that support system. And
Mhm.
it's painful.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and shout out to your parents for being
Yeah,
awesome and supporting everything you've
absolutely.
ever done. Um, and shout out to you for allowing them to help you because I know sometimes that can be difficult. I know there are times
Yeah,
where I
it can.
struggle with disability pride, I call it, or different ability pride, where I'm like, well, I want to do this, and then I get
Yeah.
salty
Yeah,
knowing I need help.
yeah, it's one of those things like, well, I want to do it. I don't want their help, but then I determine that I do need their help, and that's sort of where we're at. But they've been great, and my friends have been great. Shout out to my friends that have really embraced me, and accepted me for who I am, and I'm so grateful for that. There are a lot of good people in the world. It's just I feel like unfortunately the bad sort of takes the prominence. I
Yeah,
think there are more good people than bad people. It's just the bad people speak a lot louder, and
yeah.
so
Unfortunately, with the age of the internet, the loudest voices tend to be the
yeah.
most wrong voices. And
Yes, and I think social media has played a big part into that, especially
oh,
here over
definitely.
the past couple years. So
Definitely. And I think that's why I started using social media because I didn't have social media until 2019, I want to say. Um, and that was by choice. It wasn't because
yeah,
anybody made me. I just didn't see need for it. And then I felt,
okay.
kind of called to it to kind of be a light in those spaces, if you will. Um, but yeah, it's definitely played a role in a lot of things. Some good,
It's a
unfortunately,
gift.
a lot.
It's a gift and a curse. It's a gift and
Definitely,
a curse. Yeah.
definitely. Well, I have a couple more questions for you, but one of them being, um, how does, you know, you doing what you do in terms of maybe writing or what you want to do in the future, creating content, um, is that a source of escape or relief for you, or being able to turn your brain off to um, whatever it is you're going through in life, not even necessarily related to disability?
I don't think so. I think that if anything, it makes me embrace it more. I'm not the type of person that wants to turn my brain off and ignore the fact that this is who I am. I am the kind of person I want to
Hmm.
embrace it. I want to say, hey, This is me. If you don't like it, don't, go somewhere else. Um, I think for me, going and whether I do writing, whether I do streaming, whether I do content creation on YouTube, or a mixture of the three, I think it's important for me to get my message out. And I think that people, I'm not trying to say that my message is more important than anybody else's, but my message is different from some people. And I want to get that out. I want to, expose that other perspective. Um, and I want to have fun doing it too. And, I want to, if I make a career out of it, great, that would be awesome. Because it's something that I can do. And another thing with dealing with disabilities, you have to be smart on what you can and can't do. It's not like I can go out and apply for a construction job. There is a limited field of things I can do. So finding that proper field for me, I think has really been a challenge. And I've settled on this. I hope it works out. I put effort and money into it. So we'll see. Maybe by this time next year, I'll have something going. But yeah, I want to embrace who I am and really say, hey, I'm in a wheelchair. Funny thing is my online alias, and I don't mean to offend anybody by saying this, but my online alias has always been Cripple God. I, in a sense, embrace the meme, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's the best way. I try not to say things too offensive. Things do hurt sometimes, but most of the time I
Yeah.
just laugh at it, or just let it roll over,
Well,
because I understand most people don't say things from a mean place. In my history, there have been some, but
yeah.
you can discern which is which most of the time.
Yeah, and I think, humor is one of a lot of ways people with a disability or chronic illness or medical condition like kind of learn to embrace their circumstance.
Hmm.
For me, I think, like you said, I always like asking those types of questions because everybody's different. I can't just assume that when you're creating content, you're like, oh, I'm focused on XYZ that's going on related to my disability. And I also can't assume that it's your I'm not thinking about my problems anymore type of
Right.
situation. So being able to hear your heart and your motivation behind what you do is something that I like to learn about. For
Sure.
me, content creation, obviously what I do is like heavy on all my illnesses and disabilities, and that's intentional because like you, I'm not trying to run away from it.
All right.
And I find the more that I embrace it, the more um I end up embracing myself.
Mm.
And the more I end up embracing the things that I am able to do instead of being so heartbroken over what I'm not able to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sort of brings me to another point. I was in Nashville last week visiting a couple cousins, and went to a concert. And
Mhm.
one of the cousin I stayed with, he's a pulmonologist, and he asked
Oh,
me
wow.
how I felt about the term handicap. And I said,
Mm.
it doesn't bother me. I am, by definition, handicapped. But
Mhm.
I think I'm not someone that focuses on the terminology. I've seen people with SMA get offended by the term wheelchair bound. And if you get, that's understandable, but that's not me. I don't get offended at stuff like that. I, I guess it's just the way I was raised. Don't let what people think bother you that much. Be confident in yourself, be confident in your own abilities, be confident in your mind. And I think that's what I roll with. And that's kind of the way I approach
Yeah.
everything.
Thank you for mentioning that. And to that point, I think one of my favorite YouTubers is a YouTuber by the name Momming with Migraine, and she
Mhm.
has POTS, dysautonomia, um, CSF leak, um, in addition to chronic migraine disorder.
Yeah.
And someone asked her, how does she feel? Because in the migraine community, there's kind of, I don't want to say it's a debate, but it's a discrepancy between people who feel you should say chronic migraine disease or disorder or chronic migraines or migraine. And so she was saying like a lot of the times we get so hung up on words, we forget the original purpose of why we were setting out to do what we were doing. And so like
Absolutely.
even in what I do, like I make it a point to build relationships with different people because people are different. People respond to words in different ways. Now, there are a lot of things that I'm not going to assume.
Hmm.
Um, there are certain words that pertain to albinism I don't use because not
Right.
everybody with albinism uh is on the same, wavelength as far as self-acceptance. But I make it a point to be teachable to specific people, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
learning what bothers you, learning what bothers so and so, and being able to um, give you grace and learn from you. But I think for me, it's irritating when all we focus on is terminology instead of
Hmm.
methodology.
There's a lot of people that care more about not offending people than
Mhm.
actually understanding what they go through and learning and teaching themselves. I feel like.
Oh yeah, and unfortunately, you see that a lot nowadays with different hot button topics. People are so focused on, well, you said this. I mean,
Yeah.
I I believe we need to give people grace to be wrong. And people who know me will be like, wow, she's come a long ways for her to say that. But give
Yeah.
people grace to fail, um, and allow them to learn, if that makes sense. Because if I were to bash out or lash out on every person who called me albino. Not that that word bothers me, but I know a lot of people who it bothers. But back when that did bother me, if I was to lash out at everybody, man, do you know what that kind of resentment does to you physiologically?
Yeah. I
Um,
I can't tell you the amount of times that, and I have a really good friend of mine. He's like a brother to me, and
mhm,
I mean, he jokes and makes jokes and cracks on me, and in a joking way, not in a serious way, makes fun of me, and it doesn't bother me at all. I join in 99.9% of the time. It's just
mhm.
about just guys having fun, saying some crude things. But yeah,
And
terminology I feels like has never been a big focus of mine. It's like understand what I go through, understand who I am. Don't focus on all that. That can come later. You know, it's not
and I'll
your
give
primary focus.
yeah, and I'll give people an example like in the comments. It's like, when you're in high school, and this is the difference between high school and college. In high school, you would have a vocabulary test or something, and you memorize the words.
Hmm.
You might not know what any of them mean, but you know how to spell them because you wrote them like 100 times.
Hmm.
That does you nothing. But if you study the definitions to understand the word, you're more likely to retain the spelling and the usage of that word. And
Yep.
same with interacting with people with disability, like you and your friend, y'all build a relationship where that is cool. If Billy Bob from Nebraska just walked up to you and started acting like that, you might be like, you might laugh a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah.
but
It's
you'd be
not.
like,
It's not. If I met someone random and he said some of the stuff my friend Santos says, I would be a little like, man, what are you doing, man? I wouldn't. I
yeah,
don't think I would lash out, but I would be like kind of caught off guard, and I'd be like, well,
exactly.
knowing me, I would probably fire back. But uh, you know, I don't know. I think people in my case, and again, I'm not trying to offend anyone by my screen name, Cripple God or the Cripple God, but that's what I've chosen. That's what I embrace, and I'm
Yeah,
not I'm not trying to offend anybody. If people get offended by it, I'm sorry. But this is this is I am in a wheelchair, and for all intents and purposes, I have the right to use that terminology. Some people feel like they may not be able to, and that's fine. Um,
yeah. And to that point, I will say, unfortunately, people pick and choose what to get offended about. So things
yeah,
that actually matter, people don't care. And then when it's
yeah,
minute things that are very individual and personal, they're like, oh. And there are some cases where people will be offended on your behalf, and you ain't even offended. So,
Yes, that's one thing that bugs me very much is when I'm with my group of friends and they're kind of beasting on me and all that, and we're I'm laughing about it, I'm firing back or I'm making jokes about myself, and then someone will come in and they'll be like, "Why would you say that? Damn, that's not right." It's like, dude, I'm cool with it. Like if I had a problem with it, I would tell them, and if I had a problem with it, I know them well enough that they would respect that.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
don't tell me what I get to be offended about. I hate that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. I have a friend. He has a YouTube channel. Shout out to Kate Casper. And he says, "You can't tell the cut how to bleed."
Right. Yeah. So
Well,
it's fun though. You meet a lot of different people and they have a lot of different perspectives, and I try to be nice and patient with them, but some people can be pesky and can push and push, and then it's like, all right, I've had enough.
yeah.
So
I've met the pushy people. Let's just say they're the ones that like test how far you've grown in the level of patience, because patience is something I struggle with sometimes.
yeah,
And on that note, we talked about everything from self advocacy to your story, how it's impacted you, to mental health. We've covered a lot of ground, and I have one last question for you. I ask all my guests this, and I always
sure.
preface this by saying I don't expect one answer or another. Just be you, be honest, be transparent to your ability. And the question is, what or who has helped you to become better and not bitter?
I think there's so many factors in that question for me. There's so many answers I could give. There's not a right, as you said, there's not a right and there's not a wrong. As I've said, I'm grateful for my parents, my family, my friends. I'm grateful that I was born into this life that even though I am disabled, I've been able to be myself. But one thing that will always stick with me, and I would say would probably be the closest answer to me, is a dear friend of mine named Steve Swaining. He's like a second father to me, and he's been through
Mhm.
so much, so much. I don't want to go into the details because that's his life, but
Mhm.
he has been an inspiration. He graduated with my dad actually, so he's an old man, and my parents are old. So he's old enough to be my grandfather, really, but he's been such an inspiration to me. And I don't want to discredit any of my friends. There are a ton of them. Kenneth, Santos, Julian, Skylar, Sahara. I mean, I could go on, and Aaron. I could go on and on and on. But Steve he's my hero. I We don't agree on everything, but I look up to him. He inspires me. He's been through so much, and every day he goes out with a smile on his face and laughs. And the amount of admiration that I have for that is unmeasurable. So
That's beautiful. And the fact that you have so many people that you're like, I don't want to forget this person, that's a beautiful thing
yeah,
too,
I
because that says,
again, if I forgot your name, it wasn't by intent. I promise. Um, but yeah, dude, I could sit here for another 2 hours and talk about all the people and all the things that have shaped me into the person I am today, and that have given me a positive outlook and to help me grow as a person. So
man, that's beautiful. The fact that you have a grocery list, that is a blessing in and of itself. So
I'm sorry
without
about my
further,
camera. My camera is shut off because it's too
oh, it's
hot.
okay.
So
Okay. Long as I can still hear you, I was just gonna give you the opportunity to tell folks where they can find you online or any projects you're working on.
unfortunately, I am not ready to disclose that yet. I wish I was, but I don't want to. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Um,
Hey, it's good. Keep the people in suspense. That's what I like.
that's right. That's right.
All right. Well, thank you, Reagan, for spending your valuable time on this podcast and conversating and allowing me to learn from you. Thank you, everybody, in the comment section for gracing me with your presence as well, and your comments. I couldn't, respond that well because I had to switch to my phone because there was an issue with my computer or whatever. We'll troubleshoot that before next week. But thank you, and I will catch you guys next time. And remember, live each day with the aim to become better and not bitter. And I will catch you next week.